guys, I'm Andrew here, and I finally released part 2 to my Disney Centennial collapse video. What once upon a time was supposed to be one big massive video, although, to be fair, 57 minutes still makes for a chonker of a video. However, I was not able to get all of it out at once, and promised to finish it in the near future. So here we are, in the near future of 12 months later.
Well, took you long enough.
I promised I would follow up on the last video eventually and finish this limited series, and I'm going to make good on that promise. Eventually.
Well, we're waiting.
As this video is going to be part 2 of 3, and don't worry, you'll be definitely getting a part 3 sometime next year.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
The original plan was to divide the video essay into 3 parts anyway, except release them all at once, but I have now altered the plans to make it into a 3-part limited series.
I am altering the deal. Pray I don't alter it any further.
The 3 parts are the past, the present, and the future. I already did the past section, which covered the first 75 years of Disney's history. The present section was supposed to cover the next 25 years up to the present of 2023, which is now also the past because it's a year later now. And the future was supposed to cover, well, the future.
Back to the future!
So this video will be covering the year 2000 up till 2023, like I originally planned.
But
I intended for this video to release 2 months ago, but, well, life got in the way. Part 3 will be about my thoughts on the confirmed and speculative projects of Disney's future slate, as well as my predictions for the overall health of the company in the short and long-term future. As I said earlier, Part 3 will be released sometime next year, most likely in late winter or early spring. But hey, maybe I'll get around to it sooner than that.
like that's ever gonna happen. What a load.
I would suggest watching Part 1 first before watching this part if you haven't already seen it yet. However, it is not entirely necessary to understand the points made in this video, as Part 1 was more so a celebrative history lesson that provides some useful background information rather than an integral foundation for these points to stand upon. Alrighty then, with all the introductory bits and bobs out of the way, let us finally delve into Part 2 of Disney's Centennial collapse.
Should be amusing.
Part 2 Prologue. Disney's current catastrophes all stem from one man, Bob Iger. You might be wondering, Mandrill, how is this possibly Bob Iger's fault? Isn't he the guy who made Disney wildly successful post-Renaissance and came back to save it after he briefly left? Allow me to explain why the man who took the company to new heights is also the reason it came crashing back down.
You had my curiosity, but now you have my attention.
In order to properly get into how Iger's leadership caused the company's Centennial collapse, we need to recap Iger's tenure, as that will give us insight into how this predicament that Disney is currently facing came about.
Fair enough.
Part 2, Chapter 1, A New Millennia, A New Mouse. Disney started off the new millennia by making a leadership change that would change the culture of the House of Mouse the most drastically since the death of the Disney brothers. The man I'm referring to is of course Bob Iger. On January 24th of the year 2000, Bob Iger was named Chief Operating Officer and President of Disney, which made him the number 2 guy in the company, behind only CEO Michael Eisner himself.
Oh yeah, it's all coming together.
Part 2, Chapter 2, King of the Castle. It would only be a few short years until Bob Iger would become the head honcho of Disney himself. That day would come on October 1st, 2005, the day after Eisner retired, as he finally succeeded to the mounting pressure to give up control of the company on September 30th. Bob Iger was now CEO of the Walt Disney Company, and the keys to the kingdom, both magic and animal, were now his.
He's mine!
Part 2, Chapter 3, Cleaning Mouse. Very shortly after settling into the CEO role, Iger would already begin to make major changes to the company, such as reassigning the Chief Strategic Officer of the company and disbanding Disney's Strategic Planning Division. You know, some strategic planning could have been useful in creating the sequel trilogy.
Somehow Palpatine returned.
Part 2, Chapter 4, Let the Buying Begin. Bob Iger kicked off his first new year as CEO of Disney by purchasing a company already very familiar with working with Disney. On January 24th of 2006, Disney would purchase Pixar from Steve Jobs for $7.4 billion. Iger would appoint the Chief Creative Officer of Pixar, John Lasseter, and Pixar President Ed Catmull as the heads of Walt Disney Animation Studios. This was a smart buy by Iger, as is a match made in heaven, as Pixar's brand meshes perfectly with the Walt Disney Company. The previous relationship between the companies was beginning to deteriorate, so the buyout was a good solution to resolve those conflicts while simultaneously bolstering the already impressive Disney catalog.
Most impressive.
Part 2, Chapter 5, Reclaiming the Rabbit. A week after purchasing Pixar, Iger's Disney would reclaim Walt's first star, Oswald the Lucky Rabbit. He would do this by trading ABC sports commentator Al Michaels to NBC Universal in exchange for the rights of Oswald and the 26 cartoons that Walt created featuring the character. I'm glad that Iger got Oswald back for the company, but it's a little weird to me that a person was traded for an intellectual property.
That doesn't seem fair.
Part 2, Chapter 6, A Marvelous Purchase. In 2009, Disney would add another big purchase to its shopping list. Iger's Disney would purchase Marvel Entertainment for $4 billion. This would include all the characters under their brand, except for the ones they sold off in the 90s when Marvel went bankrupt. Unfortunately for Disney, this would include almost all their most popular characters, such as the X-Men, Fantastic Four, Blade, Ghost Rider, the Hulk, and the biggest name of them all, Spider-Man. However, Disney would not only make the lesser-known characters work, but excel. By the year 2014, they would have already made their money back, and more off the Marvel IPs. The Marvel machine was unstoppable. For a time.
Gods, I was strong then.
Part 2, Chapter 7, A Business Opportunity Awakens. On October 30th, 2012, a dark disturbance in the force was felt. It was announced that George Lucas was selling Lucasfilm to Disney for $4 billion. Disney was eager to milk this franchise as they stated they would release a new film every 2 or 3 years. However, they were not able to recapture the magic of the original trilogy nor the cult fanbase of the prequels. The sequel trilogy's legacy would go down in history as a divisive clusterfuck and has quite possibly damaged the brand beyond repair. But Disney was not done defiling Lucas's galaxy far, far away, as there was far worse offerings in the sequels yet to come. It's as Qui-Gon Jinn once said,
There's always a bigger fish.
Part 2, Chapter 8, Fishing for Foxes. On March 20th, 2019, Disney would acquire the majority of 21st Century Fox's assets from Rupert Murdoch for $7.1 billion, the largest acquisition in Disney's history. This purchase would solidify Disney's reputation as an entertainment monopoly. The New York Times described Disney's post-Fox purchase as an entertainment colossus the size of which the world has never seen. Now, why has Disney been accumulating IPs like they were Thanos collecting the Infinity Stones, you may ask? Well, the answer is quite simple. They were acquired to form Disney Plus. Part 2, Chapter 9, Disney Minus. On November 12, 2019, Disney Plus launched in the United States, Canada, and the Netherlands. The streaming service contained 500 movies and 7,500 episodes of television. Disney Plus was meant to be a game changer for Disney and the capstone of Iger's career, as this was the grand culmination of his tenure at the company. They were hoping for a grand slam, but instead got a pop fly to end the inning. Disney Plus is Bob Iger's legacy, which gives a lot of insight into the events that are about to transpire within the company.
This is the one I'll be remembered for. The War of Five Kings, they're calling it. My legacy will be determined in the coming months. You know what legacy means? It's what you pass down to your children and your children's children. It's what remains of you when you're gone.
Part 2, Chapter 10, The Mouse King's Memoir. 2019 was all about legacy for Bob Iger. He published a memoir on September 23rd titled The Ride of a Lifetime. The book describes his journey to success and fame and highlights his corporate achievements. With the release of his memoir and the debut of Disney Plus, Iger was just about ready to retire, feeling that his legacy has been solidified. Shortly into 2020, Iger officially announced he's retiring, and soon after the announcement came, the board of directors picked out his replacement.
You pick 'em! You pick who's next!
Part 2, Chapter 11, The Other Bob. Bob Chapek was named CEO of the Walt Disney Company in February of 2020. While at first it seemed that Bob Iger was ready to actually retire, Reports came out that Bob was resistant to relinquishing control. He wanted to still be the guy in charge, referring to himself as Big Bob and Bob Chapek as Little Bob. Little Bob wouldn't stay in the position for long, though, as Chapek was ousted from the role on November 20th, 2022, and Iger was reinstated. And just like that, Big Bob was back on top. It's like he never even left.
Back to me.
Part 2, Chapter 12, Iger to the Rescue? So it's no secret that Disney struggled a lot during 2022, as by November their stock price dropped to almost half the price it started the year at. And bringing back old reliable Bob Iger seemed like a smart move on paper to right the ship. However, is Bob Iger really the right man for the job? Yes, I know he's the man responsible for quintupling the stock price of Disney during his tenure as CEO. However, I think Iger's business philosophy of prioritizing growth above all else is finally coming back to bite the company. Iger may have bought every IP under the sun, but what does that matter if you're not going to properly sustain them? Disney has burned through the goodwill of the fans of nearly every franchise it purchased. Some problems you can't buy your way out of, Bob.
Your money's no good here.
Part 2, Chapter 13, Disney Centennial Collapse. It's a segment you have all been waiting for. We will now be discussing Disney's Centennial Collapse. We'll be covering what happened and exploring why it may have happened. I'll be spreading this section across multiple chapters, which I'll be breaking it down into the following segments: Pixar, Lucasfilm, Marvel, ESPN, Fox, and Disney.
Let's get it started in here.
Part 2, Chapter 14, Poor Pixar. 2023 was not an amazing year for Pixar, though it wasn't nearly as bad for them as 2022. Elemental is the only film to release for Pixar in 2023, and it grossed $496.4 million at the box office, off of a $200 million budget. Now you might think to yourself, but this actually sounds like a pretty great profit for a film. But because of how film budgets and box office revenues are reported, this is not the case. Elemental in fact barely made a profit. I know this because of the 2.5 rule. The 2.5 rule is that for a studio to make its money off a blockbuster, you would have to earn roughly 2.5 times its budget at the box office. This is due to factors such as the reported budget not accounting for marketing costs and theaters getting a cut of the box office revenue. So when accounting for these factors, Elemental only made a tiny profit. While not an outright flop, I would consider this to be a borderline waste of opportunity cost. If you're not familiar with the term, an opportunity cost is a waste of a resource such as time, money, or manpower that could have been better spent on something else. Something that would have made them a better investment on their return. But on the bright side, Pixar is at least capable of still making the occasional great film. The magic has not yet completely dried up within the Pixar building, which is more than I can say for some of the other Disney companies. Part 2, Chapter 15, Lackluster Lucasfilm. 2023 was a very deflating year for Lucasfilm. They kicked off the year with the finale of the disastrous Disney Plus Willow series, a show that was so poorly received they removed it mere months after it debuted. Great job, Kathy. That's one of Lucasfilm's main IPs ruined.
Put a chick in it, make her gay!
But hey, don't you worry, she'll get around to further destroying the other more beloved IPs too.
I'll get you, my pretty, and your little dog too.
The next IP on our list to destroy was Indiana Jones. Indiana Jones and the Dial of Dysentery shat the bed hard at the box office, making only $384 million off a whopping budget of $387 million. Indiana Jones 5 took the beloved Lucasfilm IP and further desecrated it beyond even what his previous awful entry did.
They're raping him! I can't watch! Let's get out of here, Kyle! Why would Spielberg and Lucas do this? Come on, let's go! Why are they doing this? Just run! Oh God, what have they done? Why aliens? Aliens don't belong in an Indiana Jones movie!
With Willow and Indiana Jones being drained of their life force that left only the cash cow of Lucasfilm to be milked to death at the altar of Kennedy's insatiable ego. Star Wars is the fast cash cow in all the land. However, even the galaxy far, far away has its limits, and we are fast approaching it.
I got a bad feeling about this.
Season 3 of The Mandalorian performed significantly worse than Season 2 of The Mandalorian, as both its premiere episode and season finale received substantially less viewership. Ahsoka performed worse than Mandalorian Season 3, but that was to be expected, as the first season of The Mandalorian was a massive hit, much to Disney's surprise, as they did not have nearly enough merchandise ready to satiate the demand. They learned their lesson though, as I'm pretty sure Grogu plushies are what keeping the lights on at Lucasfilm right now. Ahsoka's lukewarm reception and middling viewership may have been somewhat disappointing for Lucasfilm, but there's a far worse fate awaiting their next project. The next one is gonna sting. The days of Star Wars being an unstoppable entertainment juggernaut are over. Just look at this future slate that was released back in the day when the passion for Star Wars burned brighter. How many of these projects either never saw the light of day or were so bad that we wish they never had? The mystical space opera roots of the franchise are all but forgotten. The Shakespearean tragedy of the prequels are too from a bygone era. In its place stands sloppy fan service and shoddy deconstructionism. Since Disney bought Star Wars, they have only created 3 live-action projects that I think are worthy of carrying the Star Wars banner. Andor, which is by far the best thing to ever come out of Disney Star Wars, Rogue One, which was a surprisingly captivating prequel to A New Hope, and The Mandalorian Season 1, which despite its flaws told a pretty compelling tale of a simple man trying to make his way through the galaxy, who found himself in a new role he was not at all prepared for. There was also a couple of projects, despite being very flawed, could have been fine-ish if their sequels didn't shit all over them. The Force Awakens was an extremely flawed and uninspired film, however there was enough there that a good trilogy could still have been made in an alternate universe where Disney handled the IP with better care. The Mandalorian Season 2 started to show some worrisome signs that the writers were starting to lose the plot, which is pretty hard to do as there wasn't much of a plot to begin with. But The Mandalorian Season 2 still managed to tell something kinda resembling a satisfying story. Unfortunately, though, it got a 3rd season that undid the few good things that it did in Season 2. Well, now onto the terrible reductions. The Last Jedi was ground zero of the Disney Star Wars collapse. This film permanently fractured the fan base, and those divides have gotten worse over time to the point where you have to clarify what type of Star Wars fan you are, because the terms mean so many different things now.
What kind of American are you?
Funnily enough, the most divisive film sequel was able to unite the fan base against it.
Ironic.
The Book of Boba Fett, while largely inoffensive, was pretty piss poor in execution.
Like a panther. Yes?
The Mandalorian Season 3 was extremely shitty with an extra helping of Lizzo for good measure. Kenobi was tragically bad, and this one was especially aggravating as Obi-Wan Kenobi is my favorite Star Wars character. And Solo was pretty bad for Disney on both the financial and public reception fronts. I am one of the few souls who actually likes Solo, but not because I think it's good or anything, but rather because it's like a train wreck that you can't help but admire due to the sheer awe of the catastrophe laid out before you. Definitely a Solo bad is good type of movie. Ahsoka is a weird one because while it is a bad show, it's mainly bad because nothing really happened in it. Unlike the other bad Star Wars projects, I think this one could actually potentially have a good sequel, ? Now this is not an Andor situation where I'm eagerly awaiting a Season 2, but rather it's a show that I think there's potential to redeem itself in a 2nd season. Not everyone gets a second chance these days at Lucasfilm. The creators of The Acolyte found out the hard way.
Our Star Wars show has been canceled.
Part 2, Chapter 16, Marvel Meltdown. 2023 was a brutal year for Marvel as they had a plethora of failures to varying degrees of intensity. The sole bright spot was James Gunn's Guardians of the Galaxy 3, which raked in $845.6 million at the box office off a budget of $250 million, providing a much-needed win for Disney. However, the success will not necessarily transfer over into other projects, nor is an IP Disney can bank on in the future, as Gunn's fucked off to DC. So that's that for the Guardians of the Galaxy, because I don't think there is much of an interest for a Guardians of the Galaxy movie directed by anyone not named James Gunn. But who knows, Disney might get desperate enough to try.
I'm desperate!
Phase 4 was awful for the most part, with only a couple of projects not being utterly terrible. So if Phase 4 was a pretty major misstep, Disney noticed it too. So in a half-hearted attempt to course correct, they abruptly ended Phase 4 and arbitrarily decided to make Ant-Man 3 the movie to kick off Phase 5. While Phase 4 already felt incredibly disconnected, there was still the possibility to remedy the fact, but that door is now permanently closed, as Disney didn't bother to thread the various storylines into a culminating event in the form of an Avengers movie this time around. And while it's understandable to try and distance your other projects from the failed ones by branding the new ones differently, that only works if the new products are meaningfully different. Because if they aren't, you are just ruining yet another branding label. So let's look at the slate for Phase 5 and see how it's panned out so far. Oh look, it's just as shit as Phase 4. Good job Disney, you wasted the rebranding opportunity. After the failed rebranding, they would eventually acknowledge the fact that the MCU is struggling through meta-commentary.
Welcome to the MCU, by the way. You're joining at a bit of a low point.
The The first project to release in 2023 from Marvel was Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. The film only made $476 million off a budget of $388.4 million. This movie flopping is not a small issue. In fact, it's quite a massive one. It was a sign to everyone that the MCU wasn't the cool thing anymore and was ripe for mockery. It was now open season in the media critics community, as this movie received a slew of negative reviews. It wasn't all for naught, however, as this movie gave us the best character of Phase 5, MODOK.
Darren is dead! There is only MODOK!
The next film to release after Ant-Man 3 was Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, which, as mentioned earlier, was the only unequivocal win for Disney that year. Coming off their highest high, though, was quite possibly their lowest low, as the next MCU project was Secret Invasion. Secret Invasion did a lot of damage towards the MCU's reputation. This series was supposed to show a more serious side to the MCU, as the marketing repeatedly promised this would be a serious and gritty show. Disney likely pushed that narrative to combat the rising number of complaints about Marvel's humor. They even had the gall to call this MCU's Andor. This singular frame perfectly sums up everything wrong with this show. It showcases the Secret Invasion as yet another stupid, nonsensical Disney Plus show with questionable CGI. The show was so bad, in fact, that it temporarily united both sides of the culture war against it. The last show to pull off such an impressive feat was Velma. Secret Invasion contained many of the tired tropes found in many modern Disney offerings, such as, but not limited to, the old jaded legacy hero needing to be shown the error of his ways by a Mary Sue's sidekick, ending the film or show of a CGI fistfight with a villain containing the same power set, and having a piss-poor excuse for not calling in the Avengers.
This is personal. We can't keep depending on these superheroes to swoop in and save our asses.
It's so personal that he sends a superpowered individual that he barely knows to go in his stead.
Not a great plan.
So Secret Invasion was pretty bad and everyone was mad at it, but at least Disney wasn't stupid enough to use a CGI intro at the peak of his controversy. That would have been super careless thing to do and reveal how out of touch you really are. The next Phase 5 project to release was Loki Season 2. Loki was the only Disney Plus show to get a second season, likely because it was the only loaded series with the viewership numbers to justify greenlighting another season. However, Loki Season 2 failed to fully recapture the magic that captivated people in Season 1, as 39% less people tuned in for Season 2 premiere than the Season 1 premiere. But while Loki was merely disappointing for Disney, the next installment of the multiverse saga would be an absolute disaster, potentially permanently damaging the MCU brand.
That's the plan.
That's the plan?
It's much easier to transport a family of cats than hundreds of crew members.
So we're literally hurting cats?
The Marvels was a sequel to Captain Marvel, which was originally called Captain Marvel 2, but Disney changed the name most likely because they were aware of the fact that the character has become very unpopular among fans and were worried about the film's chances. The hypothesis is supported by the fact that the movie's release date was pushed back several times. Originally slated for release in July of 2022, it was first pushed back to February 17, 2023. Then they switched to release dates between Ant-Man 3 and The Marvels, which pushed The Marvels back to July 28, 2023. And then the film was delayed again until November 10th, 2023. But Disney couldn't delay the film forever, and Judgment Day would finally arrive come November.
Judgment Day is inevitable.
The Marvels would go on to make a measly $206 million off a massive $374 million production budget, a new low for an already floundering MCU. I think it's safe to say we won't be getting a Captain Marvel 3 anytime soon.
Is that like a personal attack or something?
Part 2, Chapter 17, The End of ESPN Plus? Throughout 2023, rumors circulated that Disney was looking to sell off stake in ESPN, and possibly the majority share of it. But Bob Iger debunked those rumors, stating, "I did not think everyone would run with a story that everything was being sold," which is not the case. Iger further clarified that they are just looking for a partnership for ESPN, but are fully willing to go alone. Iger stated, "We are fully prepared to do that," though he added it would be a little more challenging if we did. So rumor debunked. ESPN and ESPN Plus aren't going anywhere.
I'm not fucking leaving!
Part 2, Chapter 18, A Fox Fluke? At the very end of 2022, a little film called Avatar: The Way of Water debuted in theaters, 13 years to the day after the first one. Was it not enough choice to release a sequel to a film from over a dozen years ago that virtually left no cultural footprint? However, what was an even more peculiar decision was to spend $460 million on it. In order for this film to break even, it would need to make over $1.15 billion, a tall task for a sequel 10 years too late. If there was one person who would be able to pull off a miracle during the era of big blockbuster flops, it would be James Cameron. And Cameron, the mad lad, he fucking doubled that number as Avatar 2 The Way of Water raked in $2.3 billion at the box office. $2.3 billion!
Mexico. All I'm saying.
James Cameron must know something we don't, because nobody in their right mind thought this movie would make over $2 billion. Yet here we are, a year away from the third entry releasing, wondering if James Cameron can strike gold a third time. And you know what? I think I learned my lesson. I'm not going to down him on this one. I have no idea how he keeps doing it, but I recognize a pattern when I see one. A James Cameron Avatar film equals billions of dollars. Figuring out how the Avatar franchise is so financially dominant, but so culturally irrelevant, will probably be my white whale. See you in round 3, James.
To be continued.
Part 2, Chapter 19. Disney's Disasters. All in all, 2023 was a pretty disastrous year for Disney. They took big hits both in the wallet and in public perception. Disney lost over $1 billion in the box office in 2023, as well as losing 14 million Disney Plus subscribers, a decrease of 8.53% of its total subscriber base. Many of its IPs are struggling or outright failing, and the brand as a whole has been quite tarnished. Disney is no longer a symbol of quality. In fact, it's almost the opposite these days. When people find out Disney's behind a project, they expect the worst because they have been burned so many times as of late. Disney stock also took a beating that year, as it dropped 32% from its early year highs.
Disney stock just keeps going down and down and down, and then Bob Iger is all like, no, what's going on with my stock?
The final slap in the face for Disney that year is that their Centennial celebration film Wish bombed hard at the box office, making only $255 million off a production budget of $200 million. Losing $131 million, celebrating your 100-year anniversary, is quite a spectacular way to collapse in your Centennial.
He's out of line, but he's right.
Part 2, Chapter 20. Mainstream Mockery. Disney has been, for the most part, protected from any meaningful mainstream criticism. Sure, it got blasted for years by peoples of the internet. However, Disney was very rarely criticized by the media nor its peers. However, this started to change when South Park, a show of major cultural ramifications, decided to make Disney its punching bag with the joining into the Pandaverse special.
And everyone in town is like, no, please, Kathleen Kennedy, stop ruining everything. But Kathleen Kennedy is all like, put another gay diverse woman in it, make it more fucking lame.
Now, Trey Parker and Matt Stone did also take shots at fans who obsessively hate on Disney, which has been used by many defenders of Disney to try and spin the narrative that that was who they were really making fun of and not Disney itself. Reality is, it's both. They're making fun of both sides like they normally do because they are base centrist. However, the fact that they called out Disney like that emboldened others to do the same. Scores of articles were written about Disney in the wake of the South Park special. While not all of them were negative, the press around South Park's satirization of Disney shined a light on the fact that there were some major problems within the House of Mouse.
Something's wrong, I can feel it.
Part 2, Epilogue. So now that Iger's tenure has been thoroughly examined, I think it's finally time to sum up how it all went wrong. Bob Iger was incredibly ambitious, there's no denying that. But that ambition that got him to where he is today is what's also causing everything to fall apart. This is an Icarus situation where Iger flew too close to the sun. In his ruthless expansion of Disney, he lost sight of what made the company special in the first place: good storytelling. Disney used to be one of the best at it, but they lost their way due to Iger's business philosophy. Iger is spreading out his most talented creatives too thin in an attempt to pump out as much content as possible. This led to Disney hiring subpar writers to help pick up the slack, and the actually talented creatives that stuck around usually didn't get the time they needed to make something special. Bob's quantity over quality approach could only work for so long, because eventually people are going to tune out if your products are consistently a waste of time. Bob Iger's tenure was like a trader in a bull market constantly expanding their portfolio, but now he's caught up in a bear market and all those investments are starting to bleed money. However, in this analogy, the market crash was largely a self-inflicted one. This didn't have to happen. Bob Iger's ego grew too big for his own good, and his sense of entitlement bled down into his subordinates. I'm not saying every problem within Disney is Bob's fault, however the buck does stop with him. So if he's not capable of fixing the mess he helped create, well, then perhaps it's time for Big Bob to finally retire for good. But what do I know? I'm just a monkey with a microphone. Thank you so much for watching to the end of the video. This one was a doozy to make. Basically everything that could have went wrong did. I had frequent tech issues, writer's burnout, constant IRL stuff distracting me, and a big glitch that caused me to lose a third of the script for the video. With all these setbacks, delays, and distractions, it took me months longer to get this video out than planned. Since I was unable to get it out in 2024, I had to hastily add some text captions to clarify some now misleading statements about when Part 3 will arrive. I don't know when exactly I'll be getting Part 3 out, but it will most likely be later this year. Well, that's all I have to say about that. Happy New Year, everyone.